If you're interested in supporting the channel, there are two things you can do. Flipside Gaming is offering a 10% discount for any order $10 or more if you use the promo code VOIDMAGE on their website. That is VOIDMAGE in all caps. I will also have an affiliate link to Tcgplayer.com. If you use that link, any purchase you make on that website will go towards supporting the channel. I appreciate the support. Also hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Hello everyone, welcome to a special edition of 10 underrated Commander cards. What I usually do is just find any 10 cards regardless of set. I usually try to keep the costs down, but sometimes that's difficult to do, and cards can still be underrated while still being something like $20. But what I'm going to do here today is specifically focus on reserve list cards, affordable reserve list cards, after receiving positive feedback, including reserve list cards in previous underrated cards videos. This is something a lot of people want because you're not as likely to find these in bulk. If you want a really good common or uncommon of the newest set that's so easy to find, some of these are not. And that's just because they're never going to get reprinted. And I didn't just want to go for any reserve list cards because it's not about the investment opportunities, it's about the actual playability of the cards. So these are good cards. All of these are under $10. I think most of them are under $5. And the deal here is that usually when you go to Ice Age, Weatherlight, Alliances, some of these sets, you're going to have cards that are valuable because they're good, whereas if you were to look at Antiquities or Legends, Arabian Nights, if a card's expensive, it's usually just because it's from one of those sets. You get things like shorter print runs. But let's start it off here with the first card, Debt of Loyalty, 3 mana in white, an instant, regenerate target creature, and then you gain control of that creature. So regenerate, tap, the next time it would be destroyed. It's not. This is a really cool thing because you don't see it that often in white. If you have the ability to gain control of creatures, it is sort of another way you could go about removing a problem creature. Why I think it's good in Commander, because creature stealing effects, abilities are very powerful when you can steal an opponent's commander. Usually by doing that, you can derail their whole strategy. So something like this is not only a cool off-color ability, but it's cheap enough, it's instant speed, so that it's actually worth playing for a lot of people. And then next we have a blue card, Dominating Lycid from Exodus, 3 mana blue Lycid. With an ability of 3 mana and tap, Dominating Lycid loses this ability and becomes an aura enchantment with enchant creature. Attach it to target creature. You may pay 1 blue to end this effect. You control that enchanted creature. So we talked about stealing with Debt of Loyalty. Typically, blue is better at stealing things than most other colors. Red can also steal, but it's usually until end of turn. This is really powerful. You see a lot of cards in blue from around this time period, and a lot of blue cards that do end up stealing creatures are designed a lot like cards from this era. Cool thing here is that you can end it by just paying that 1 blue and then use the ability all over again to steal another creature, which is what you want. You don't want a one-time use. And the next we have Carnival of Souls, a 2 mana black enchantment from Urza's Destiny. This one is really cool. Whenever a creature comes into play, you lose a life and you add a black to your mana pool. I know a lot of people are going to think this is incredibly dangerous, and you're right. In a multiplayer game, you have to deal with other opponents who are likely going to want to play a bunch of creatures as soon as they see a card like this. But there are certain decks that can take advantage of this by offsetting that with life gain. There's Soul Warden, Soul's Attendant. There's a bunch of creatures that will gain you life just by having creatures enter play. So as long as you have one of those out there, this is just pure value by giving you black mana. Super efficient, just being 2 mana to play. It's really a surprise to me that I haven't seen it that often in Commander. Just by looking at it though, it offers a lot of power for decks like Tesa or Orzhov Scion. You already have a combo element there where you're going to have a bunch of creatures entering the battlefield. This will also let you generate a bunch of mana. And the next card we have is Heat Stroke. Like Debt of Loyalty, this is also from Weatherlight. 3 mana red enchantment. At the end of each combat, destroy all creatures that blocked or were blocked this turn. Red isn't always about giving yourself every reason to swing consequence free. Sometimes it's about forcing your opponents into making terrible decisions as well. Now red can also force your opponents to attack, force them to be aggressive, and hopefully your aggression, you can outpace your opponents, because whenever those creatures block, whenever they're going to be blocked, those creatures are going to be destroyed, and that's usually what's going to happen, because if not, you're just going to be able to swing in uncontested if your opponents want to protect their creatures. So ideally here, you just want to build up a board presence and start swinging. Your creatures can be destroyed a lot easier, but it's really a tool used to punish your opponents whenever they want to attack, making it easier to kill their creatures. Just all around a very good combat-oriented card. One I would recommend if you're playing something like Fantas, you're already manipulating combat, you want your opponents to attack, or something like Marissi, you want to goad your opponent's creatures, force them to attack that way. There are a lot of combat shenanigans in newer commanders, and it's not as straightforward as it used to be. So have fun with a card like this. I think it's pretty good for how cheap it is. And then next we have Seeds of Innocence, a very cheap 3-mana green sorcery. This one's from Mirage. Destroy all artifacts that can't be regenerated, and the controller of each of those artifacts gains a life equal to its converted mana cost. So if you were looking for a way to get rid of all artifacts, you have a pretty cheap way to do it in green. Green doesn't really have a problem with artifacts. You do have a lot of ETBs that get rid of both artifacts and enchantments, so something like this kind of flies under the radar, only being able to deal with artifacts, but you destroy all of them. If you're playing mono green, you just don't have a reliance on artifacts, so this doesn't really hurt you at all, or at least it shouldn't. Now, a consequence of being able to do this for just 3 mana and completely wrecking artifact decks is that they gain life. It shouldn't matter too much because if your opponents play artifact lands, artifact ramp, something like Brea, where most of their deck is going to be artifact related, I don't really care how much life they're gaining. I should be able to establish my board presence and keep pressure on them. Maybe it takes me a little bit longer, but I pretty much got rid of all of their board, which for a lot of powerful decks, artifacts are a big deal in Commander. We have Recycle from Tempest, 6 mana green enchantment. You skip your draw step. Whenever you play a card, you draw a card. A downside of this awesome ability is that your maximum hand size becomes 2. It is such a risky card, but some of the most fun cards to play with in the Commander format are the risky cards. It's why people love Necropotence. You're paying a bunch of life. Yeah, you get a lot more value off of a card like that. You get to keep a lot more, but Recycle just seems like a bunch of fun. There are a ton of loops, a ton of ways that you can play spells, and it rewards you for playing those spells by letting you draw cards. The obvious downside here is that your hand size becomes 2, but hopefully this helps you go off in a single turn and puts you in a position where you can actually win the game. And usually card advantage does do that. I just think people maybe stayed away from it because of that risk factor. I think it would be a really cool thing to fool around with if you're a combo player. And then we have the first multicolored card here, Reparations. Now I've talked about this card before on underrated Commander cards videos. 3 mana white-blue enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell that targets you or a creature you control, you may draw a card. It has different wording because a lot of older cards were not created with the awareness of multiplayer. So whenever it says something like target opponent, it usually is going to mean every opponent. One of the more hilarious cards when it comes to artwork and flavor text. But if you're into Pillow Fort, that whole strategy in Commander, it's a pretty popular one, and in white and blue you have perfect colors to do that, giving you access to things like Ghostly Prison and Propaganda. But this doesn't really stop your opponents from doing anything to you, which is a pretty underrated thing. I know some people might not agree, but if you can flat out stop someone from doing something, they're more likely to go after you than if you just say, well, I'll draw a card if you target it. You know what I mean? Because people get upset if they have to pay mana to attack you. This doesn't stop them from swordsing one of your creatures, they just let you draw a card. So if you think about things politically in the game, you are a lot less likely to draw hate for that reason. Does it mean it's not as good as those other cards that are going to stop your opponents from messing with you? Yeah, maybe, but you still get an upside here, and maybe people think twice about targeting you. And the next card we have is a really sweet one, Breath Stealer's Crypt. 4 mana blue-black enchantment from Visions. If a player would draw a card, instead they draw a card and reveal it. If it's a creature card, that player discards it unless they pay 3 life. Now the ideal deck that this goes with is Nekasar the Mindraiser, and I think a lot of people know about this card because of that deck specifically, and I can't really blame people for playing it in that deck. It is probably the best deck you can put it in. It's just a very good card that can also punish decks that want to go off, draw a bunch of cards. If they're going to use something like Recycle, hoping that they get to their big creatures, they have to consider paying life in order to keep them, which if you pile it onto other things like Cataract Parasite, Underworld Dreams, getting pinged with damage for every card they draw, suddenly paying that 3 life is not really a possibility if they want to stay in the game. This is really one of those cards that I think could go up because it just piles on that life loss. Wheel strategies, windfall strategies are very popular in the Commander format, and while Nekasar has been one of the more dominant ones, there's no doubt in my mind that people are going to return to that strategy in the future. So keep an eye out for a card like this. Very easy to put it into a Commander deck. And now to end the video, we have a couple pretty good ones. The 9th card is Esmira Holy Avenger, a 4-mana green-white legendary human cleric with flying. At the beginning of each end step, put a +1/+1 counter on Esmira Holy Avenger for each creature put into your graveyard from the battlefield this turn. So not only do you get some really sweet looking artwork from Rebecca Gay, you get a pretty cool aristocrat themed Celestia card. It's kind of an off-color ability. I know white does fool around with graveyards and so does green to a degree, but this always seemed like something you would probably see in black. You want to incentivize sacrificing creatures. Usually white doesn't do that. This is more like a contingency plan. If your creatures happen to die, you're not completely screwed here. You have a creature that's going to get bigger. You have commander damage as a viable option to win the game. And Mirage is one of those sets where a lot of the reserve list cards are still dirt cheap. That may not be the case 5 years from now, so while I wouldn't recommend it on its power, it does have a unique ability in green-white, something you don't see a lot of. And then the 10th card here, the 10th reserve list card to talk about is Lord of Tresor. 4-mana legendary zombie in Grixis colors, blue, black, and red. When Lord of Tresor enters the battlefield, you lose 2 life, you sacrifice 2 creatures, and target opponent draws 2 cards, and activated ability of 1 black to regenerate. Now that may seem like a lot of bad things happening to you, but you do get a 10/4. A 10/4 with no abilities, but this is Commander, just throw some equipment onto it, and there you go. An aspect of Commander I think Lord of Tresor is perfect for is politics. This may look like it's nothing but bad for you, but you can play buddy by letting one of your opponents draw 2 cards. And sometimes that's important if you want to be able to deal commander damage and at least swing at somebody else. Also, another obvious direction you can go with is zombie tribal, and zombies don't really have a problem sacrificing. You usually have a way to replenish tokens, and in Grixis colors, you have access to so many zombies. Alliances, again, it's one of those sets where there's a bunch of reserve list rares that are not that expensive. I think it could be good as a commander, could definitely be good in Grixis zombie decks in the future. Just a regenerating 10/4 that you can give evasion with equipment, abilities, in a lot of situations it's just going to be 2 swings and an opponent is dead. But anyway guys, that's going to do it for the video. Hope you enjoyed the 10 underrated cards on the reserve list. Just reserve list rares, maybe not a lot of people know about. Just nice to have some of these cards. They're never going to get reprinted. I know a lot of cards I recommend on my underrated commander cards videos are not super expensive. I think these are pretty good if you're looking to play commander, or you're just looking to get something that's not just going to be a worthless piece of cardboard, you know? Down the road, if you decide to sell your collections, these might be more than just $5. So hope you enjoyed it. You all have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next video.